Welcome to the Institute for Management Studies Leadership Conversations podcast, where we have leading thought leaders discussing their research and identifying ways that you can incorporate it to take your learning and development to the next level. Welcome, everyone, to this IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. My name is Charles Good. I'm your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to highlight relevant research and practical applications from esteemed leadership thought experts and leaders, as well as practitioners. Today, it's my pleasure to be joined by Park Howell, who is known as the world's most industrious storyteller, helping leaders and purposeful brands grow for 35 years. He's been in the business, including over 20 years running his own ad agency. He is also the founder of the Business of Story, a proven platform based on a 10-step story cycle system to clarify your story, amplify your impact, and simplify your life. Not only that, but he's also a very popular podcast host of The Business of Story, which is ranked among the top 10% of the most downloaded podcasts in the world, and a best-selling author of Brand Bewitchery, How to Wield the Story Cycle System to Craft Spellbinding Stories for Your Brand. Thank you for joining me today, Park.
Charles, it's my honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we start talking about storytelling and some of the areas in which you're well adept, I wanted just to kind of talk a little bit about your background, because you have a very eclectic background, lots of things that have happened in your past. But first, I love to hear the story about how your dad decided on your name. I think that's kind of an interesting side note with Park, because you don't hear that name very often.
No, you don't, actually. And the important thing to know here is I'm one of 7 kids born within 9 years of each other. So My mom and dad got married late when they were 29 years old. That was late in their time. And so they cranked us out. And there is Dan, Melody, Tom, Steve, Chris, and Mike. And I'm number 5 in that, Park. And so I asked my dad that. I go, where in the world did this come from? And my dad grew up in North Dakota. He was a civil engineer, graduated from University of North Dakota right at the end of World War II. And his very first job was working for the city of Fargo, North Dakota, as a civil engineer. And his boss was named Park Tarbell. He was a Norwegian with the first name of, actually his middle name was Park. His first name, I believe, was William, and he didn't like William, so he went with Park. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but how come me? And my dad said, well, the thing about him is he was the nicest boss I ever had. He just got things done easily and happily. And that's kind of the way my dad went through life too. About the time I was born, Park Tarbell had passed away. So my dad just said, you get his namesake, just because my dad admired him so much as his very first boss out of college. So here I am today trying to make storytelling as happy and easy as possible, I guess.
Hey, that's a great way to weave that in. I wish my name came about in a nice story like that, but I think my name was more determined by a famous commercial back in the 1970s, certain tuna. And I won't go into the details on that, but that's how
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I think I got my name from that commercial. So, and you have so many things that you've done. I mean, you've developed curriculum for leading research institutions. You've developed military leaders with your storytelling background and shared the stage with many famous figures. Is there one story that you would like to tell our listeners that really was influential in your storytelling ability, or something that really just stood out in your background?
And I started studying story in earnest around 2004. I was kind of dabbling in it a couple of years before that, but we were lucky. Our middle child, our son Parker, I'm Park, he's Parker, so he's got his own band. He was going to Chapman University Film School in Orange, California. And while he was going there, I said, hey, send me your books and your lectures when you're done with them, since I'm paying for them, because I want to see, what do they teach you about being a competitive storyteller in the most competitive storytelling market in the world, LA and Hollywood. That's when I found the hero's journey and Blake Snyder's 15 steps to story. And from a marketer, I'm like, we could use this stuff. How come nobody talks about that? Then Parker and I went to the legendary screenwriting course by Robert McKee, who's been doing it forever out of Hollywood, at the Sheraton LAX for 4 days. And this was back, I think, in 2009. And so I studied more to apply this. And the one thing I learned about the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell is Campbell was famous for saying, when you follow your bliss, doors will open where there were only walls before. So what I learned in this, Charles, is not a month after Robert McKee's legendary story training course that I went to, and I went and talked to him a little bit after some of the sessions, and I met his wife there. They invited me out to their home in Connecticut to do my very first podcast. I'd never done one ever, and I was trying to launch mine, and told them I would love to interview them, and they were so kind. So the next thing I know is I am living the Joseph Campbell thing of follow your bliss, because I was amazed by storytelling and just enraptured by learning it. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in Robert McKee's living room in his Connecticut home and spend 3 hours making up this podcast. I'd never done one before.
Wow.
But you just got to get after it. That's one of the, I don't tell that story very often, but that's one that really had an impact on me that said, you know, I'm on the right path here.
Oh, that's a great story to tell. And I know that it's such a critical leadership skill as well, to be able to be an effective storyteller. And many leaders feel that it just happens by chance, or you're just born with this talent, that you don't have to develop it. But what I found from my experience, from listening to you, reading your books as well, is that it's something you don't do by default. You have to practice it. You need to work on that craft continually, and you get better at it. And you don't need that many good stories in your repertoire, right?
Yeah. You know, we are all born with that storytelling talent because we're all Homo sapiens. Essentially, we are storytelling monkeys. It's the one thing that separates us. Well, there's a few other things, but the one real intellectual thing that separates us from almost any other organism, because no other organism tells stories, organizes in stories, leads with stories, uses stories fictionally to paint a brighter tomorrow, and then backs up that story by actually living into it, to turning that, you know, fiction into fact. So the thing about it, though, is I learned the hard way, like so many of us. And it was when I was running my ad agency, we would put out 2, you know, like TV spots for a commercial campaign. And I can think of one we did for Goodwill of Central Arizona. 2 30-second commercials, put them out there. This is about 2003. One of them pulled unbelievably well. I mean, they saw a spike in traffic into their Goodwill stores out here, 40% in 1 month. Wow. The other one that ran in tandem with them didn't pull at all. I mean, it was like a lead Zeppelin. And I looked at these 2 spots, Charles, and I said, why does this one work and why doesn't this one work? Because we loved them like they're like our children, right? And it wasn't until I started looking into story, and I looked at it and I go, oh my God, this spot that worked has this natural, intuitive story structure to it. We didn't think about it. We just wrote it and it came out this way. This other one was just a creative cluster. We were so proud of how creative we were. Didn't work at all because it couldn't hook into that limbic storytelling brain. That's when I learned to move from being an intuitive storyteller, which we all are, to an intentional ones, when using the frameworks that I've learned and that I've applied and that I teach to leaders and sales teams and marketing groups all over the world now.
Well, that's great. And that's nice to make that distinction, right? Between everyone has that ability, but it's nice to have that structure. And that structure you put in your latest book, Narrative Gem, the ABT approach, which I'd like to go in a little bit more about now, because it's the ABT approach, very simple. It's almost deceptively simple, to where you're thinking, how could it be so powerful? And why didn't I know about it before if it's this effective? But if you could just walk us through the basics of it, it's that and, but, and therefore, and why is that such an effective hook for telling a story?
Yeah, and I found it by going from the complex hero's journey, the 10-step story cycle system, down to, it all actually starts right here with this ABT. The reason, Charles, why it works, as you pointed out, and, but, therefore are your marker words you're looking for, is they use the 3 forces of story. And by that, I mean agreement, which is like act 1 of any great story. We agree this is where this story begins, and here's our protagonist, here's what they want, and here's why that's important to them. Of course, in an ABT, your audience is always the center of the story. They're the protagonist. So we're looking at you and say, Charles, you guys are doing such great work there, and you want to bring in more leaders so that you can have the impact in the world you see. So you're nodding, right? But, all right, so that's the major trigger word, but it's not happening as quickly as you like, maybe because you're leading with logic and reason when what your audiences really want is that emotional pull of a story. So now we've introduced the contradiction, the conflict. So we've got agreement, contradiction. The third force is consequence. What is the consequence of that agreement, then that contradiction? Our cause and effect limbic system wants to close that story loop and say, okay, Park, how does this thing end? Well, let me show you, come on over to IMS and we can do this, and this, for you. So that's the power of the and button. Therefore, it is deceptively simple because it takes work. You got to just do them over and over again. And it builds this narrative intuition of setup, problem, resolution. And that's where all really powerful business and leadership storytelling begins.
And once you know that framework, once you are familiar with the steps, then you start seeing it everywhere. One of your proudest moments I heard from the book was, identifying it in a speech, a very famous speech by our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address. But it's not just limited to speeches. It's in movies. It's in nursery rhymes, songs.
It's absolutely everywhere. Yeah. Now have you ever seen, that FedEx logo with the arrow in the E and the X? And, you never notice it until someone points it out to you. And then you go, whoa, there it is. Now you cannot not see it. Well, once you start working with the ABT, you are going to see that it is used on you everywhere. Someone's communicating, they're trying to connect with you and reel you in somehow, some way. A lot of times people aren't even realizing they're doing it. They're really good intuitive storytellers and they know how to create story tension. And you're going to see that and, but, therefore in it. Our thing is, look at all of us can become better storytellers. And so this is one of those intentional frameworks that you can use to go from intuitive storytelling, which I kind of equate to winging it because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, to being an intentional storyteller. So you're winning with it way more often than not because you've got these intentional frameworks that you can use.
Makes all the sense in the world. And out of that ABT framework, you had mentioned that the first step really is the but, right? Is the problem. Identify the problem first, and that's what excites the brain while the solution quiets the brain. And then once you've identified that problem, then go from there, correct?
Yeah, and this can be confusing for a lot of people. So when you are sharing an ABT, you don't want to start with the problem. You want to start with this statement of agreement that validates that here's what a brighter tomorrow can look like, but here's the problem. Therefore, here's how we can help you overcome that problem to get what you wanted up that statement of agreement. To your point, Charles, I think what you're asking is, and I do this through my courses, when you are first sitting down to write that ABT, you'll write them and they'll be this long. And then the job is to get them down to this long. So start with the problem. What problem are you solving for? And just go ahead and write that but. And then once you get that down, say, yes, that's what I'm solving for. Then you go up above that and you write the statement of agreement. All right, so what does my audience want? And why is that important to them? But they don't have it because of this. Therefore, here's how I am here to help you get it. Give you a quick example of it. I was doing some work with leadership over at the Home Depot, and their sales team on both the East and West Coast. And one of the guys in one of the sessions said, Park, what's the shortest ABT you've ever heard? And I go, well, I actually wrote it. And it goes like this. Most executives, in this case, most leaders communicate and care, but bore. Therefore, tell a story. It's the shortest ABT I can think of. And so if I'm writing that out, I said, what am I solving for? Boredom. Because if you're boring your audience, you're not going to be moving anybody to action. And as a leader, that is your biggest concern with this this ABT is not be boring. So now let's back it up. Okay. You're a leader, you communicate and care. Yes, I do. And I do care, but unfortunately you bore. Now, therefore tell a story. Now you could expand that. So that would be like, okay, that's just my basic to get into it. If I was to expand it, it might sound something like, you are a leader of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. And if you can connect sharing your unique vision for the future with your people, then you will be able to compound growth by 10 times. But you're not connecting because you're leading with logic and reason when what their brain wants is the emotional appeal of a story. Therefore, activate your people by connecting with that primal limbic system through the power of story, where, oh, by the way, all of their real buying decisions are being made. And I'm going to show you how, beginning with the and button, therefore. So that's a much longer ABT, just expanded on that very short one, but you can feel the dynamics of agreement, contradiction, consequence, and our cause and effect pattern-seeking limbic brain loves that.
No, that's great, the way you masterfully did that, and great for drawing that distinction. When you're telling the story, follow A, B, T in that order. When you're trying to create an effective story, start with the but, start with that problem first, so that you can make sure that you hit on that customer need that you're trying to solve for. Now, once you have that ABT framework, then the second step really is to find an example story to set it up like what you just did. And then in some cases, for a presentation, for a project, is to build out that story cycle system to bring it all together, correct?
Yeah. So Charles, what you're talking about there are the three primary frameworks that I teach, beginning with the ABT. That second one is the 5 primal elements of a short story for big impact. And when I say short story, I say something that you can tell in under a minute. It's like an anecdote, right? And all that is an expanded ABT. And here's how, how you use them. Think of them as a 1-2 punch. You come into a presentation and you want to get the attention of your audience with the ABT. So you tell that in under 15 seconds using that framework. And they're going, wow, you know, you're right. That is the problem we're solving for. Their next question, whether they ask it or not, is, can you give me an example of that?
Right.
And so then you say, for example, last Tuesday, I saw this happen. You just gave them a timestamp. We were down on the supply chain line. Now we've got a location stamp, and what we're doing is triggering the brain. Like, oh, something must have happened because Park is taking to a time and a place. I ran into Jerry down there, and all hell had broken loose. They had found, you know, something that happened and broke on the supply chain line, and they had to shut the whole thing down. Now we have action. But when they shut it down, they found this surprising answer to a problem. I'm just winging it here at this point. They have surprise in that action. And that's why we need to take this next step to do this and invest into that so that we don't have this happen again. You see what I used was the 5 primal elements of a timestamp, a location stamp, a singular person, not 2 people, not a team, not a division, not an organization, not a department, one person, Jerry. Something happened, a surprise outcome that makes your business point for you. When you do that, you can tell that ABT in that story in under 90 seconds. You've now just used 2 storytelling frameworks on your audience. That, you know, 3 forces of story, agreement, contradiction, consequence with the ABT. Now you're inviting them into an emotional story that you are actually demonstrating your business point in real life. And Charles, as you well know, nobody can argue with a true story well told. They can argue with your assertions, your opinions, your data, your charts, your graphs, but they will never overcome a true story well told that makes your business point for you.
Couldn't state it any better. And that hero's journey is really interesting because it's not really an invention, right? But more of an observation. And it's a set of principles that kind of conduct life and the world of storytelling, the way that you mentioned physics and chemistry governs the physical world. Yeah. And these elements came from Campbell in that monomyth, and he had it, I think, at 16 or 17. You've condensed it down to 10 of those essential elements. Why do you feel that the hero story is so engaging? What has drawn people from ancient times to keep using it? Because there was a recent, or maybe not recent, but Kurt Vonnegut, he has a fascinating tool about exposing a story's architecture, right? And he has a formula, and he says there's 6 distinct emotional arcs in any story. And I think the hero's journey could kind of be superimposed upon this, but you know, it's from rags to riches is one of those, a rising emotional arc, riches to rags, a falling emotional arc, and then he has 3 or 4 others.
Man falls in a hole, gets out of a hole.
There you go. Icarus, Cinderella, you're right. How does that kind of, so you have these emotional arcs, but can you give more insight into that hero's journey and why it's so memorable, and the movies, books gravitate to having that as part of their storytelling?
Yeah, well, what I've learned, what I've experienced, and I've read so many different books. One of my favorite books for people that really want to study story and the hero's journey is called The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. It was originally written for Hollywood, but it is really now written for any kind of writer, but you don't have to be a writer to really appreciate it. And it does the best job that I've seen of anyone to define why the hero's journey is so important. But I'll even go back to Robert McKee, the legendary screenwriting coach, said, it's just simply a mirror to life. We all experience this hero's journey day in and day out at all different sizes. We could experience it in one morning. We could experience it in one hour meeting with our leadership. We are on it as we go through college. We are on it as we marry people, and we have these big epic journeys. But when you start mapping them to the hero's journey, you see these same steps. You start in status quo. The hero is at home, hanging out. They get a call to adventure. No, thanks. I'm fine right here. Oh, no, you're coming with me. They're thrown into this extraordinary world. Think about it. You can apply this to anything that you went through that was difficult, and you came through it better on the other end. You go and you've got allies. You've got people, villains that are against you. You've got obstacles, antagonists. You battle the metaphorical dragon, which is really your own internal voice saying you can't possibly pull this off, but then you overcome that. You get better. You learn something in that process. You come out of the other end and you return back to your ordinary world. It's your office, it's your family, it's wherever. But as Campbell talks about it, you have leveled up. You return with the boom. You are better, smarter, faster, stronger, more courageous for what you've gone through. So you can bring back those learnings and teachings to the community around you. And then guess what? You get to go through it all over again. You get a new call to adventure. Anytime you take a new job, that is a new call to adventure. You go into that new office. That's your new bizarro world that you got to figure out how you are going to fit into. You have some successes there, but then you run into some, antagonists, some villains, some people that are going to kind of block your success. You were promised a bunch of resources that, only half of those are now available to you. Can you still possibly pull this off? You roll up your sleeves, you get innovative, you go through it. When you come out the other end, you're a better person for it. Essentially, that is the hero's journey. It works because we can all innately recognize it in our own lives.
Now, how do you fit that in with the ABT? Is that the next level of building out the story? So for those stories that need to be part of a presentation that you can construct or a project, how does that fit into kind of what you're doing with the storytelling?
So what I did, again, I started with the complex world of the hero's journey and the story cycle system. I teach it exactly backwards now. And what I've done is I've broken down my 10-step story cycle system, which is just simply the hero's journey mapped to business so that intellectual left brain reason business mind can get it. Otherwise, they would, dismiss it as woo-woo Hollywood. I boil it down that you can use the story cycle system for everything from brand story strategy, which is you really roll up your sleeves, to a deep dive into it and come out with what your big brand story strategy is. Or you can also use it for any sort of long form communication. And by long form, I mean anything over 2 minutes in this day and age is long form communication. Or you've got a sales presentation. You're going in 5, 10, 15 minutes to an hour. And you go and use this one sheet that I've developed where you write out, I just ask you 10 questions. Actually, there's about 14 questions, but they all mirror up to the 10-step story cycle system. I have you answer them in the order that I want you to then make your presentation. And oh, by the way, these questions are all about your audience. What do they want? Why is it important to them? But why don't they have it? Therefore, how are you in this presentation going to show them how you can deliver on that? And so I've also got things where I've got 4 categories of anecdotes, and that's a whole other discussion. But the idea here is to put together a long form communication using the story cycle system that is a story of stories, essentially. And you are just trying to connect with your audience in their normal world, in their regular world. You are the call to adventure, and here's where we need to take you. Oh, by the way, it might get a little bit more difficult before it gets easier. But when we come through the other end, it's going to be way better than where you are currently now. Here's how we are your mentor guide in this process, uniquely equipped to help you get what you want. And at the end, this is what the new world is going to look like for you. Kind of my grandiose way of saying it, but all we're doing is just using that story cycle system, the hero's journey in essence for business, to be able to map, like a screenwriter would, a new movie, your overall sales presentation or a leadership presentation or a marketing presentation, and then just drop in 1 or 2 or 3 stories where you need them to keep moving them along from chapter 1, chapter 2 to chapter 3.
I love that approach, and it's very effective. I'm anxious to learn more about it as well myself. Now, you're also been influenced in the brand Bewitchery book with Robert Cialdini, right? And his book on influence, and you've incorporated some of those principles into your storytelling curriculums as well. And I love the book as well. I love his other book, Persuasion, but his magnum opus, I guess, would be this influence book. And I'd love to take 1 or 2 of those and just kind of see how you weave those in. Because the first one that he always talks about after he goes through the introduction is the reciprocity rule, right? Where you're more obligated to do something for someone if they've done something for you. And he uses great examples. He uses the Hare Krishnas on how they give you unsolicited gifts, and now you feel compelled to give them something in return. But how have you used that principle in your storytelling process?
You know, as self-serving as the whole reciprocity principle appears to be, it can be done very powerfully, but always with your audience in mind, really in service to them. And here's how I use it. So I've got a couple of online courses. They're very short. I've got one on the ABTs of selling. Just came out with the ABTs of branding. The ABTs of selling is under 18 minutes, 3 short videos with me to give a student, an attendee, a quick bite on how this works and ask them to actually write them up. And then I even invite them, send me your ABT and I'll coach you, via email back to you. I sell it for $35. It's like basically giving it away. But so often I will just give it away. Here, go check it out. Go do it on your own, because I know, number one, they're going to get leveled up and it's going to help them. So I just feel better. And I just think that's big karma, doing its job. But number 2, I suppose I'm building a little bit of reciprocity in there, because then a leader will do it and he'll say, man, that is so good. Park believes it's so much in it that he actually gave it to me to be able to do it. Maybe we need to bring him in to teach the rest of our team how to do this. So I am in service to everyone that takes that, because I know it'll work for them. But selfishly, I guess, or not so selfishly, because my job is to help as many people as I can, I need to open that door somehow. So there's going to be reciprocity in that. Sometimes, not all the time, but occasionally people will go, that's cool, man. Let's bring you in. Let's have you teach everybody else. So I guess that would be one example of it.
Oh, that's a great way of incorporating that concept. One more I think we have time for, and that's that commitment, right? That Robert calls, where it's if you can get commitment, you're going to set the stage for automatic commitment later on, so that they don't appear to themselves to be inconsistent with what they've already believed or agreed to before. And Robert does this great through the book, talking about Korean prisoners, right? Prisoners of war who were writing sentiments that were anti-American, but not doing it to the point where they were forcing them to write it, but kind of brainwashing them in the process. And because written commitments are just more effective than verbal ones, since they require more work, more effort. It's the same reason why fraternities have hazing, right? Or with boot camps in the military, that persons who go through a great deal or trouble or pain to attain something, they tend to value it more highly than if they just put in a minimum of effort. What are some of the kind of those commitment things that you found effective in your selling approach that helps salespeople to get more buy-in, more commitment from those they're trying to sell to, or maybe as part of your storytelling process?
Yeah, Charles, that's one of the best questions I've been asked all year, even though the year is young. Actually, probably since I started these kinds of presentations, nobody's ever asked that. And I think it's a fantastic question. So I got to really think about my answer, but here's my deal. To get their commitment, you as the salesperson and the storyteller have to be committed to two things. Number one, that story you're sharing is the truth. You're not BSing. You're not making it up. It actually happened, and you are in a position to be able to deliver on the promises that you were sharing in that story. That gets your audiences leaning in. That probably first builds a little disbelief, like, I'm not really sure. Could you do that? Could you really pull that off? Which then you have to have the passion and energy to be able to communicate your belief in your product or service. So number one is you have to be absolutely committed to a truthful story, well told, because if it's not, it's going to be found out eventually. Number two, then you have to absolutely positively deliver on the promises that you make in that story. Once you deliver that first time and then that second time, they're committed, because they're like, you made a big promise to me here. I wasn't so sure you could pull it off, but you've already done it. You've showed up, you've done what you said you're going to do. I'm all in. And they will then be willing to take a much deeper plunge with you than not. So I think it's some of those other examples like you were talking about from his book. Those are brainwashing. Those are manipulation. And I want you to think of it on the other side. You're not brainwashing them. You're inviting them into a story that's not always going to be easy. The journey's not always going to be just like perfect, but you are going to be by their side, and you will promise that it is going to be worth their effort every step of the way. And you're going to take them from here and rise them up to here, even though you had to do this in the process.
No, you did a very good job at answering that difficult question, especially on the fly there. So I appreciate that. As we reach the end of this episode, I always like to ask and have a call to action at the end. Park, so is there one thing you would recommend leaders do to get better at their storytelling? What is one action they could take today or next week that would move them a little bit farther along that path?
Here's what I do. Start with the ABT, because that's going to build your narrative intuition. You don't have to take the course. You don't even have to read my new book, The Narrative Gym for Business, although it's really worth it if you want to learn the ABT. So you know how to and, but, therefore you get one and, you get one but, you get one therefore. I want you, after this session, to write 3 emails today, starting with an ABT. Look, you're already writing these emails anyways, so we're going to habit stack on that. Instead of writing these big, long-winded emails, start them each with an ABT and see if they're not only way shorter, they're much clearer, and you'll probably even get more reaction to it, engagement from it, from your reader, because you're not making them think. And it's got a built-in CTA. Number 2, if you want to really learn how to use this stuff, go and teach 2 people, friends, family, colleagues, whatever, about what you just learned about the ABT. Because as you speak it, you think it, and it will start getting more ingrained in your body, in your mind, and you'll be able to use it. And then the last thing I want you to do, any big communications challenge or opportunity that's currently on your plate, maybe it's a big sales presentation or whatever, sit back down, take a deep breath, even if you have to start all over, and write an ABT about it. What is your singular narrative, that one problem you're solving for, and ask yourself, who's my audience? What do they want? And why is it important to them? But what's the problem? Why don't they currently have it that I'm going to help them overcome? Therefore, here's how we're going to help you overcome. If you do that, you will be well on your way to start becoming an ABT ninja. And that's where all powerful business storytelling begins.
Great advice. And I love that plug for habit stacking. There's those 2 great books by James Clear on Atomic Habits and BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits that are great with that. So to incorporate multiple skills here. And then also, I love how you said, try it out on someone, explain it to someone, because you even mentioned in your book that Dunning-Kruger curve, right? Where people often think they can learn something quickly, but when they try to use it or try to explain it, it's not that easy. They step back and say, whoa, maybe it's not that simple. So being able to teach it to someone, to talk through it, really allows you to know it versus just know the label for it. You now actually understand that principle. So great stuff there. Let all of our listeners know how they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, come on over to businessofstory.com. or reach out to LinkedIn. That's my preferred channel. I've got a weird name, as Charles identified early on, Park Howell. Just look me up there. I'm about the only one that pops up. Would love to connect with you there. And of course, if you're interested in taking either the ABTs of Selling or the ABTs of Branding course, just go to Thinkific, and that's businessofstory.thinkific.com.
We'll make sure that's in the program notes today. I wanted to thank you very much, Park, for being my guest on today's episode.
Charles, thanks so much for being here.
And this concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. Please write a review for the podcast if you enjoy this. And if you haven't subscribed, this podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify and can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know that matters, it's what you do consistently that makes the difference.